Okay, I'm going to talk about a very long extended drought that we've been experiencing in the Murray-Darling Basin. I'm just going to start. I appreciate that many of you probably don't know where we are, so I'll just give you the absolute bare minimum geography that I can get away with. I'm going to then tell you what's different about this drought. I'm going to make some comments about climate variability and climate change, and talk about some of the lessons. Climate variability in particular is something that will be a real feature in this presentation. Climate variability is an inherent part of the Murray-Darling Basin. So. No doubt many of you have seen this diagram before. This is after Don Wilhite, who I actually met on Monday when I gave another presentation to a joint USA-Australia Drought Summit in Canberra, where I come from in Australia. And it's fair to say that crisis is where we are now. And in terms of climate change adaptation, dealing with water policy, we have some new legislation being drafted that is going to change our world and the way that we manage water in the Murray-Darling Basin. So, and that is very much linked to having been in that crisis. Back to the geography. You can see Australia in the lower centre. Just for comparison, we're at latitudes that are typically, around the world associated with arid climates. So, the Murray-Darling Basin is approximately 14% of Australia's land area. It only has 6% of Australia's freshwater resources. So we're already behind the 8 ball in terms of being reasonably dry part of a dry continent. The basin is about 1 million square kilometres, which my Canadian geography is very limited, but I understand that that's about the size of BC. We have 2 million people dependent on water supplies, including 1 million in Adelaide, the capital city of the state of South Australia, which is located just outside of the Murray-Darling Basin in the southwestern corner. There are 2 major river systems, the Murray and the Darling. The Darling is actually longer than the Murray, but it only contributes about 10% of the flow that would, under natural conditions, exit the mouth at down near Adelaide, again in that southwest corner. So the Darling headwaters have less rainfall, and the Darling runs through 1,000 kilometres of desert before it reaches the Murray, so much of the water that's generated in that system is lost. We're a very low-yielding system, so about 9,000 gigalitres of median annual runoff, and about 4,500 of average diversions. Diversions for irrigation primarily. Irrigation is 90% of the water consumed in the basin. The Murray-Darling Basin is Australia's most important agricultural area. So it supports 40% of Australian agriculture, but importantly 70% of our irrigated agriculture. And we have a range of environments. So we do actually have some snowfields. Many of you might be surprised to know. They're very small in comparison to yours. I'm just going to slip back up a slide. This is rainfall distribution in the basin, and it's the major driver of runoff in the basin is the southeastern corner, so the Australian Alps, where those snowfields are. Just keep that in mind. I will show various maps of the basin. There's one coming up showing rainfall deficits. So just keep in mind that southeastern corner is very important. Okay, just back on this one. So that southeastern corner produces more than 50% of the flow that goes out of the Murray Mouth under natural conditions, less than 5% of the area. So less flow than the Amazon in a day is generated by the basin in a year. There's that southeastern corner again. And this is showing rainfall deficits that we've experienced, in particular in 2006-07. So we've seen lowest on record rainfall over the most important part of our catchment. One of the things, and I apologise, I've got lots of graphs, so I did get the instructions yesterday, and I was told to use pictures rather than graphs. I do apologise for this. But one of the features of our system, as I said before, is the variability inherent in the system. So what you can see from this chart is the blue dotted line is average monthly inflows to the River Murray system, and it's dominated by winter-spring, which is 6 months out of phase with yours, dominated by winter-spring runoff, and we also feature very low base flows in summer. And that low base flow is, and the variability that we have is often what makes our hydrology of great interest to other places in the world, where perhaps they're experiencing more variability as a result of climate change. So variability is something that we've just learned to live with from day one. It's a natural feature. So that's shown here. You can see the sort of event-based variability, the spikes in the red line, but the one that's a real standout is the 2006-07 season, which was significantly less than the previous worst drought on record. I used to say that there were 4 things that were different about this drought. I can only say that there's 3 now, because in 2007-08 it was the first time that we'd actually had 2 really bad years in a row. As you can see, we're into a third, so perhaps something is changing. There's no historical precedent for the sequence that we're in now. Yet another graph. This one shows our streamflow records go back to 1892. Rainfall and temperatures, temperatures are around 1910 onwards. Rainfall, we have some stations that go back to the mid-1800s, but streamflow, we've got good streamflow records from 1892. This shows the sort of variability. So the red line is, that roughly 9,000 gigalitre per year median annual inflow to the system. And you can see the annual variability that we also experience. So we've got 3 kinds of variability. We've got event-based variability in response to individual rainfall events. We've got that monthly pattern dominated by winter-spring inflows and low base flows in summer. And then we've got inter-seasonal variability where we have droughts and floods. Okay, the second thing that's different about this drought is, I should go back to that first slide. What you'll notice here is that there are 2 other periods in our period of record where we have also experienced long extended droughts over a 10-year period. So the first one was around the turn of the 20th century, and the second was what we call the Second World War drought. This one is worse. The inflows that we're experiencing now are worse than any of those 2 previous droughts. The other thing that's different is that we've now got the consequences of a highly developed system for irrigation. So there's never been so much pressure on the system as there is today. The bottom black line shows the growth in diversions from the 1920s through to the mid-1990s, when we actually put a cap on irrigation extraction. So there's a cap on every valley, and that cap is set at 93, 94 levels of development. It's climate adjusted, so that in a wet year you can still use more, in a dry year you can use less, but it's a rolling average. So we aim for a 93, 94 level of development as a rolling average, as a limit. We recognise that that is not a sustainable limit. That was, I guess, the first step in addressing our over-allocation. Okay, you can also see the blue line is the growth in storage. That's major government storage, major dams. Okay, the third thing that's different about this drought is temperatures. There's no precedent for the temperatures that we've been experiencing. So the first upper left chart is global temperatures, which go back to 1860. Our temperature record starts from about 1910, and there is a correlation, and there's no precedent for temperatures in either of those 2 previous long droughts, like what we've been experiencing now. So temperature is very important. 1 degree increase in